Hello, hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Zoom Hope Live. It has just been an awesome week. Here in the Bahamas, we have been locked down for 2 weeks fighting COVID-19. So of course, this is just an opportunity just to get out. And so this year is actually Hope for Me. So welcome to Zoom Hope Live. How about you, London? How has things been going with you?
Yes, this week has been pretty busy too. I have two of my friends are getting married today. Two of my other friends got married like less than a month ago. So there's been some positive things happening over here. It's been hot. I'm in Texas. It's been really hot outside. So pray for the AC bill at the end of the month. We need some hope there.
All right, so we're going to get into our program today, but of course, as usual, there is something that we want you, the Zoom Hope family, to always do.
Yes, and that is, yes, and that's share this live feed. For those, there are many of you who are faithful, who watch every single Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if this has been a blessing to you, we just encourage you to share so that this conversation can be edifying to more than just you. And so if you can share it on your different platforms, you can also find it on YouTube. For those who do not have Facebook, we will post it onto YouTube by Wednesday of this coming week. And you can also follow us on our Instagram page. We're getting that going so that you can just get a little bit more information about our panelists. So I just invite you to share. The last thing that I have to say before we get into who our panelists are is you can put a question. You can submit a question to us in the comment section. We have some discussion points that we have already prepared to get into. But if there's something, a question that you have, please put it in the comment section and Larry will be sure to see it and we'll see if we can answer it to the best of our ability.
So. Great. So we're living in a time of civil unrest where people from everywhere in the Bahamas, in different parts of the Caribbean, in the United States of America, just across the globe are crying out for equality and equity. You know, our differences should be celebrated instead of being a weapon against us. And this week, our panelists are going to share about that, diversity and inclusiveness in our churches, in our schools, in society at general, diversity and inclusion. So we have a real good lineup of panelists that we want you to know. And I am going to start with Jaymie Pottinger. Jaymie Pottinger, he is the vice president of the Forest Lake Academy, and he is a motivational speaker. He's just a dynamic man. And I want you to just take a few seconds, Jaymie, to just tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, you're muted. Let's unmute you.
Okay.
Yes.
What a way to start. I guess already we need to have some fairness around here. Come on, can I get an amen here? Jaymie Pottinger, I'd like to take this time to say a special thank you to Pastor Larry and Henderson for having me join this program this afternoon. I currently serve as the vice principal at Forest Lake Academy. I also serve as the CEO for Pottingers and Associates, where I work as a strategic alignment expert with different companies and organizations where leadership is concerned, and giving them an opportunity to align strategies with people's strategies in terms of moving organizations forward. And we understand the challenges that are there in terms of equity, equality, and moving persons from different communities to effectively function in their organization. So it's all about adding value to people and giving people the skill sets and the tool sets to move forward in terms of making the best decisions without partiality and with fairness in terms of moving it forward. So it's a pleasure being here with you guys, and I'm looking forward to having a great evening.
Amen. Amen. Glad to have you. Glad to have you. Next, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Laurellé Warner, who is at Walla Walla. We actually have two individuals that are representing Walla Walla today. But Dr. Laurellé, if you can tell us a little bit about your position and what you're doing and what brought you to this point. I'm trying to unmute you. You have to unmute yourself first. Yes. All right. You're good. Let's hear it.
I guess it's the trending, you know, beginning without unmuting. My journey in terms of being interested in diversity and equity, I think really is embedded in the fact that I am a licensed clinical social worker. And it is hard to do social work without thinking about issues around diversity. That is one of the core tenets of social work. So professionally, but also personally, in my research centers around resilience in Black women, as well as resilience in Black women in comparison to Black men. And I came to that because in my study, I realized that everything about resilience was very much a Western dominant position. And I became curious around, well, how do Black women understand and define resilience, and how is that different from the dominant narrative? In addition, I felt like who would be better equipped to talk about resilience than Black women who have had to experience issues around being excluded, being marginalized. And so from those 2 points of view, my professional training and my personal research brought me into really being excited and feeling like I really need to be able to just continue to privilege issues around diversity and inclusion.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm excited to hear more from you. Pastor Larry?
Yeah, as Cassandra was talking about, Laurellé rather, was talking about diversity and touching that just now in terms of being resilient. That's very important in the time that we're living. Our next panelist is none other than Michael Timothy Nixon. He is a man that is powerful. He's a man that is straightforward. I was introduced to him through, of course, the internet. My first time seeing his name coming across my screen. He's currently the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion at the Andrews University, our university, London. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Michael, as we go forward in the program today.
Well, thank you, Pastor Green and Pastor Anderson, for the invitation to be here on the program. It's a privilege to be with you all. And I hope I can live up to that introduction. As was said, I'm Michael Nixon. I serve here at Andrews University as the VP for Diversity and Inclusion. It is pretty amazing to think that I'm getting ready to start my 4th school year and serving in this role. And so God has been good, time has flown. And so I'm really excited to contribute to the conversation. And one of the reasons why I feel a passion to not just to do this work, but to be engaged in these conversations is because I believe that we need to invest in the area of diversity and inclusion, not just across all of our different campuses. And I think our different campuses are doing that in different ways, which is good to see. but also just throughout the structures of our church. I think we're seeing in this current moment and in several other previous moments how necessary it is to invest in and operationalize diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Oftentimes it's that thing that we take for granted. And so it's my hope that we continue to see further investment and commitment across our sister institutions, as well as throughout the Adventist institution at large.
Yeah, that's good. Yes. That's with everything that's going on in the world, there's not just an outcry in society, right? But there's also been an outcry within our church. And so to see more diversity and inclusion, not just more people of different colors, but the mindset and the culture that comes with the diversity that our church makes up. And so, yes, our next last but not least panelist here is Cassandre Beccai. And she is also at Walla Walla. She has a ministry that also has to do with hair, black hair. But I'll let her tell you something. I was really excited about that when I started. This woman is beautiful, and she's also intelligent. And so, Cassandre, if you can please tell us a little bit about yourself in the area of diversity and inclusion. What got you thinking and interested in this particular field?
Thank you for this invitation. So at Walla Walla University, I currently serve as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Specialist there in Human Resources. I think what's given me drive and what I really appreciate about the work that I do is how meaningful it is to the landscape of the school and its culture. And although most of my work deals in policy, I found that policy is the groundwork for everything that we want to see as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that to me has been a very rewarding thing, a very kind of slow moving type of work, to be quite honest, but still very valuable. You mentioned my hair care, my business, and although that's not something that I currently do, when I started that business, it was really about encouraging particularly Black women. And since then, I find ways to do it in various ways. And my platform now is expanded to other things and other opportunities, but it still has a close, it's very close to my heart, that mission of continuing to empower people of color, Black women in particular.
Yes, for sure.
Right.
So I hear you saying that, within the area of policy, while it's foundational to how kind of discriminatory things are legalized, right, or are accepted as the norm, that to change those things, it takes a while to change those things, and you're coming face to face with the slow pace of changing policy. Pastor Larry, what are we doing next?
Well, we're gonna jump right into the question. I'm gonna ask you to take us into our first question. So you have a panelist. These are the people that's gonna take us on this wonderful experience today. And of course, Cassandre, London has been saying it over and over at the end of so many programs that we need to do a program on hair. So I don't know if I'm really going to take up that challenge. But today it's diversity and inclusion. Take us into our first question, London.
Yes. I would like to say it's not me, it's really Larry's wife that wants the program about natural hair, natural Black hair to be specific. But yes, Cassandre, if you could please take our first question, and that is, why should organizations such as schools and churches have an office of diversity and inclusion? Why is this a necessity, and is it a necessity?
London, I think it's very important, but I have to say that the reason why I think it's important is because at the very least, for any organization that, especially an organization of higher education, I think it's very important that they consider whether or not the organization itself is about the work of anti-racism or anything like that. I think it's really important to consider the fact that they're sending out students, and in the globalized world that we live in, it just makes sense to me that diversity and inclusion would be part and parcel of how to equip students to be global citizens in a world where, you know, it's no longer, we don't have the walls we used to anymore. You know, when you work at organizations, especially the top ones, you're going to come in contact with all kinds of people. Yes. In my other life, I worked for Microsoft as a web producer, and I have to admit, probably the trait that took me the farthest was the ability to work with all kinds of people from different backgrounds. You're connecting with individuals who may not have the same cultural background as you. And it's important to, at the very, very least, in my opinion, have a D&I office that speaks to things like cultural intelligence. Now, I will say that in my opinion, the work of a D&I office can have a spectrum, and it all depends on where the organization is at in terms of, you know, their leadership. What does their leadership really want? What is the culture really like? But in my opinion, on one side, I would say cultural intelligence is kind of awareness and equipping people to be able to speak to each other and understand, you know, very basic cultural characteristics of each other. Yeah. Is on one side. And then the other side of the work of a D&I office, you know, depending on the organization, what their goals are, is the work of, you know, anti-racism, anti-ableism, anti-xenophobia, anti-neurodiversity, you know, that kind of work, it all falls under a D&I office, and they, I believe, have the best platform to create the tools, give the tools to an organization to be better, and whatever the organization's their particular goals are, where the organization's ideals are, is where the D&I office will kind of push a little bit and kind of create that opportunity for people to learn and grow and be trained and X, Y, and Z. There's a lot more to say about it, but I think that's it.
Yeah. I mean, in a nutshell, I hear you saying that it's important because our world is diverse, and it's important that as individuals, we understand and learn how to interact with cultures that are different from our own, and not kind of live in a bubble that people who look like us, think like us, and act like us, and those are the only people that we're interacting with, but making sure that we're expanding our horizons that represent the world at large. Michael, is there something that you would like to add to this conversation, and why is it necessary to have such an office as the one that you hold, right? The VP of Diversity and Inclusion at Andrews University. Why is it important to have such an office?
Yeah, I was going to say, I better make a case for it being important so I could continue being employed. Amen. So maybe it goes without saying that I believe that it's important. But no, and you know, irrespective of the, you know, the work that I do, or the fact that it being important is tied to, you know, my existence here on campus. Outside of that, you know, I think Cassandra made some really good points, and I really want to build upon one of the things she brought out in regards to the importance of the posture of leadership in an organization. Because if you're, so for example, in the higher education space, if you have a president or a provost or a chief financial officer, so those three persons are, I mean, all of the decisions at an institution are being made they're at least intersecting with those three persons. Any major decision, of course, in collaboration with the board of directors. And so your board of directors is really important as well, because, you know, the president operates on the authority of the board. And so if you don't have key persons in those positions that are committed to this work, then diversity, equity, and inclusion work is going to fail, or it's going to continue to just be seen as like the, you know, the fire person on campus. Like, okay, you know, some racist incident has happened, or some issue of bias, or, you know, some other incident, or we need somebody to put out a statement, you know, during a critical moment in time, like around, you know, the time we're in right now with the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others. You know, it can look really good to have somebody say something, you know what I mean? So that's a good point person that you're able to go to. But in order for it to rise above and beyond that, in which to me, that's the only reason, or I mean, that's the only scenario upon which I think an office for D&I really does make sense, or that I would say, yes, you need to have that office, because I'm not really interested in, you know, having an office of D&I for optics, or, you know, only in response to a particular incident. You know, an incident can be the impetus for the creation of an office. That's what happened on our campus. But I think the reason why our campus was ready to move as quick as it did in the wake of It Is Time, which happened in 2017 before I got here, was because we had a diversity council on our campus since the early 2000s, and we had people from that council advocating for the position that I steward now, dating back to at least 2004. Wow. Every year, and they had a job description, you know, prepared and together. And so when the time came, they said, well, we've been doing all this groundwork. It's time to make this move. And the university and the leaders of the university, Dr. Luxton, Dr. Arthur, our board of directors said, okay, it is time to make this move. And we were able to move forward. And so coming in and onto campus, you know, I think as much as they were interviewing me, I was also interviewing them, because I wanted to understand, okay, what is this really about? And, you know, are you sure this is what you want? And, you know, are we going to take steps towards becoming an anti-racist institution, as Cassandre was just talking about? And so now on Juneteenth 2020, you know, I didn't have to write a statement, but our president can write a statement saying Black Lives Matter, and we're committed to becoming an anti-racist institution. Are we perfect? Have we figured everything out? Have we answered all the questions? Absolutely not. I have more questions than answers for sure. But in 3 years, I've definitely seen some progress. I've definitely seen some movement. And that's only been because, it hasn't been because of me, but it's been because of, I think, the passion of our students for sure. And so in any organization, you need to have stakeholders like students, or in a church, you know, you need members who really are passionate about this and who will push and hold you accountable. So I think that's been key. Leadership has been key for sure. And again, a willingness to say, hey, we don't have all the answers, but better questions lead to better answers, and let's commit to this process. And so I think that it's important to do, but I think the posture of those key constituencies are really important as you think about how you move forward. And if you need to do some work on that posture before you jump out the window and say, all right, let's have an office, let's hire somebody, or, you know, who's a person of color on campus that we could just, you know, plug in, or whatever the case may be, just to do it, then I would say you maybe need to do a little bit more pre-work before you move forward, in my opinion.
No, I respect that. I mean, go ahead, Larry.
I just wanted to chime in with something I saw from the interaction on social media. And of course, it's within the same vein. And I believe you're speaking to the question. A question was posed from Colin Major, which states, what value does diversity and inclusion brings to the organization? And an answer was followed by Sonia White. And this is what she says: everyone's opinion matters and should be included, whether you are in agreement with or whether you are not, at least to hear them out. And as that question, it was posed on social media, and I'm following the interaction. I believe you already start to speak to that, Michael.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that that's great to say, even right. So myself as an African-American woman, while I am against what we call Eurocentric ideals, in that that is the supreme ideal and it is above every other culture. And that's to say that European thought is superior to every other culture. I also, with how Sonia responded, believe that it should also be included in the conversation, right? When we talk about tearing down the patriarchy, right? We're not, at least myself, I'm not saying that I want to do away with masculinity, right? I'm not saying that I want to do away with fathers, right? I'm saying that I want to do away with the ideal that they're better than. And so I definitely agree that diversity and inclusion is not to throw away one person's voice to replace another, but to listen to all the voices that have something to say. And something that I heard Michael mention is that, hey, if you're going to have an Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Equity and Diversity and Inclusion, make sure you understand what it means. Don't just try to find a token person so that you can say that we're good to just kind of plug them in. We have one, right? But allow your heart to really be in it. Jaymie, from an organizational standpoint, I know you were saying that, you know, you work with organizations, and particularly you're evaluating diversity and inclusion as you're helping these organizations. How has that why is that important to do? Why is that important to do? So we talked about schools, we talked about churches, and now what about from the business perspective as you're helping businesses get off the ground? Oh, you're muted. All right, now you're good. Let's hear you.
One of the things that we have to pay attention to, the fact that most of our organizations and our institutions were founded in that background with a blueprint that automatically suppress one group above the other. With that platform, it puts one group at a disadvantage. So we have to ensure that we have offices, or we have a mindset that provides the safety, security, and opportunity for these groups to perform beyond being subpar. When I say subpar, I mean in the fact that sometimes you have groups accept a given persona based on the systematic stuff that is in place to ensure that they stay in line. So that suppressive nature goes right across the board. And you have some social groups, and people are discarded based on the way they look, where they're from, their accent, you name the different things. And we also have what is called the conscious and unconscious biases that these groups also have. And what that does, it further imprisons certain groups and prevents them from moving forward. Now, the reason, or the answer to your question is, why is it so important that we have an Office of Diversity and Inclusion? First, with inclusion, meaning that all parties, all groups must feel a sense of belonging, and belonging not just in the naked word belonging, but they must understand that they have a slice of the pie that is provided for everyone. And that sense of belonging means that they should be celebrated for who they are, where they're from, and the unique side of their culture or their tendencies, or you name it, to ensure that they could maximize their given potential as they move through that given group. Now, when you think about diversity, and we talk about the church, the schools, and organization, we understand now, and it's an old term, but it's still relevant today, is that we have a melting pot kind of experience where people are from various groups. But the question is, how are they treated? Are we still using the archaic system that should be relegated into antiquity to govern the way that we promote, the way we treat, the way we empower, the way we cater for groups? And because we're failing to do that, there must be an office in place that allows people to feel safe in sharing when they are being abused, in sharing when they are being sidelined, in sharing when they are being marginalized because of where they are from, the way they look, or whatever, you name the different list of things that could cause them to be in that group. So what this office does, it offers that sense of safety without getting retribution for sharing exactly where they are. We understand that sometimes when people share, there's also a system in place that allows them to share, but use their sharing to put them in a given group so they could be marked off for any means of moving forward, because you are the leader that is now taking a charge towards changing the status quo that has served to keep one group in power and kept another group in isolation or relegated from any opportunity to move forward. So I think when it comes on to diversity and inclusion, Any organization at this point, whether or not you have an office, there must be a mindset or a place for a conversation to ensure that people are treated fairly and people have an opportunity to be themselves instead of suppressing themselves and end up losing their unique nature that would have added value to their given organization, the leadership, and the level of success. Because we know that organizations that are doing the best at this time are organizations that are agile in the sense that they're able to make moves, to make shifts, to pivot, to cater for the growing diversity in terms of customer needs and the fact that you have a sense of belonging in the products and services that are offered by that given group.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, whew, you just said a lot. So for those who need to process through all of that, it was dense. It was a lot of content. What Jaymie said was good. It was all good. So if you need to pause and rewind and listen to that again, do that. Okay, Laurel, we would if you can answer the same question about the relevance of an Office of Diversity and Inclusion, or a position of diversity and inclusion, now will be the time to do that. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that there are three arguments that can be made. There is an ethical argument, and ethics is about how ought I to be with others. And if we are going to have a conversation around that, it is important to have an office. It's an ethical mandate for churches, for organizations, for schools to be able to be thinking critically around how do we want to be with each other? How do we leverage the voices and privilege the voice of everyone so that, going back to what Jaymie said, there is a sense of place. I need to be able to have a sense of place, this sense of belonging.
Yes, yes.
A second argument goes back to what Cassandra said as well, related to there is an economic argument for having an office. We live in this very global world, and so we need to be able to know how to interface and interact with people that are vastly different from us. And if we have the skills where we can interact with people, not only the skills, but the commitment to it, that is an argument because it creates this competitive advantage that others may not have. And last but not least, there is a legal argument for it. Again, going back to what Jaymie talked about, it is important for people to be able to have a place and a space that they can go to describe experiences related to microaggression, micro insults, micro invalidation. In addition to the fact, the civil rights talks to us about the fact that it is important for people that are different to be able to feel comfortable knowing that if there are violations, I can go and I can have a conversation in a way that offers me freedom without the fear of any kind of retaliation or retribution. So I think those three arguments is an ethical mandate, business advantage, and finally there is legal precedence.
Yes, yes, yes. That's good. That's good. And then even more specifically, let me throw this out there. Even more specifically for those of us who call ourselves Christians, right? There's a spiritual necessity, and that will bring us into our second question, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you. I have been really excited, right? Just listening to the discussion here, as well as following the discussion online. It's really hot. And this is a topic that people want to be discussed. And, you know, people are dying for this, not only to be discussed, but for it to come out of the discussion and be seen at their workplaces.
Real action.
Yeah, just this week, I've spoken to individuals who said, you know what, I have to really walk away from my job because of the kind of discrimination that is happening, you know, just me not being heard and being thrown in the corner. So I am really appreciating the inputs. the question that we have that I like to pose now is, what is the correlation of equity, capitalism, and the gospel? And how do these terms influence the work in the area of diversity and inclusion? And perhaps maybe, Michael, you could start with answering this question.
Well, I think what the question is speaking to is more of the economic implications of the conversation and how we should approach those questions as it pertains to the gospel. I think that when we think about the concept of equity, let's just start there. And lots of folks have brought this to light, you know, in more recent years, but for a long time, there was a lot of focus on the term equality and that whole concept, which is a great concept, right? And I think that, you know, equality is sort of the end goal. Equity is the tool that you use to measure whether or not you've gotten there, and also the tool that pushes you towards getting there. Because what equity says is that it looks at the world, or, you know, your institution or organization for what it is. It takes a critical look and it says, okay, we continue to have unequal outcomes across different people groups, whether it's women within your organization, whether it's people from a different race, with different abilities, with different you know, ethnicities, things of that nature. And you keep seeing that, but, you know, an equality lens would just say, oh, okay, but, you know, we love everybody. Like we think everybody's great. And so we're all good, you know? And so whatever issue that there is, that there must be some issue with them. We just need to remind them that, you know, we like them equally. While equity says, no, let's examine our system and our structure and understand what is it about our system and structure that is continuing to perpetuate these different outcomes. And so when you think about that through the lens of capitalism and our capitalistic economic structure in this country in particular, I'll speak for America, there is a slew of history that goes into the reality that there are huge inequities in the wealth among, for example, your average Black family as compared to an average white family. Now, is that because, you know, Black families don't like money and that they don't care about finances? You know, that's the trope that sometimes is out there, that, you know, we just, you know, we spend our money on cars and clothes and all this, you know, and Jordans and all this different other foolishness that you hear out there, as opposed to looking at things like the creation of the banking system in this country, and the creation of the lending system in housing, which systematically excluded Black families from getting access to the capital that was necessary to either buy or build a house. And so you created generations of wealth within the white family, while you were excluding categorically on the basis of skin color Black families from doing that. So, you know, folks from like my parents' generation, maybe not even them, probably the generation we have now of millennials are one of the first generations that have anywhere close to sniffing something close to an equitable chance to being treated fairly in the housing market. You know, and my background is housing, so that's why I often start there. And so when we think about that from a gospel perspective now, you know, I think that the gospel calls us and compels us. You look at the launching of Jesus' ministry in his hometown Nazareth in Luke 4, when he read from Isaiah and talked about the Spirit of the Lord being upon him because it anointed him to bring good news to the poor, to set at liberty the oppressed, to give sight to the blind, to prepare, you know, the way, you know, to proclaim that the kingdom of heaven essentially is at hand. It's now. Yeah. And he closed up the scroll and said, this verse that you've read, in your hearing, it has come to fruition. You know, basically like saying, I'm the one, and it's now. And the response was that they tried to kill him. And so I think that oftentimes, Exactly. Like they said, whoa, like, first of all, isn't that Joseph's son? You know, hearkening back to the interesting stories around his birth story, and this guy immediately trying to invalidate him, raising him up, you know, walking him up to the highest point in Nazareth and trying to cast him off the mountain. And one of the most interesting things about that story that I always look back to is it talks about how in the midst of their anger and, you know, they were stirred up, ready to kill him, he just kind of passed through them quietly and nobody noticed. And so oftentimes I wonder, as we're proclaiming the gospel in our churches and our institutions, and we're talking about issues of equality and equity, diversity and inclusion, and we look at that in the context of the way that our economic structures are, you know, really shackling people, I often wonder whether or not they've realized that Jesus sometimes has left the room, and they're just kind of stirred up saying whatever it is they have to say. And Jesus is moving towards where the gospel is calling our feet to move, while we stand in our monuments and proclaim something that's less threatening and more comfortable for us, because the gospel is always going to challenge you. It challenges me on a daily basis. It's always going to ask more from you because of the fact that there are those on the outside that are being oppressed, that are shackled and need to be set free, because that is the call of the gospel in the midst of our capitalistic, materialistic, particularly this country, but I dare say our world.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Jaymie, you look like you're itching to jump in. You know, like
when somebody is dropping it so hot as pastors doing, you got to stay tuned. So those are just key points. So look, those are solid stuff. But when you look at the church, when you look at our organizations, most of our organizations are built on that foundation that puts one group above the other. When we think about the systematic approach to how certain things are concerned, when we look at equity, as Pastor just made mention of it, we think about equality and we forget that some group, they may say this, the common term is that pull yourself up by your bootstrap. You know, I've been given a boot, but I haven't been given a path to walk on, while others already have a path and a boot, so they could make their way all the way to New York City while I'm still stuck in the South. So that kind of mindset prevents us from moving forward. And we have that. When we think about the capitalist mindset, sometimes we only think that that's just found in the business and the overall societal economic structure, but it's found in our church. And what happens when that happens in our businesses, we find that some of the disadvantages for a capitalistic mindset is that human welfare is ignored. And in the purest sense of the word of a capitalist mindset, human welfare is ignored and property rights take precedence over human rights. So if you have more, you have the capacity to gain more. And it means that because you have more, you also have the means of stipulating and mandating what happens in the market and what happens among people. So you could determine exactly which group advances above the other. Then when you think about the social injustices that comes with that economic mindset of inequity, then you recognize exactly why certain people are suppressed as opposed to others, because you say that I could get a house, but I can't afford the land. You said I could get a house, but I can't afford to pay the mortgage. And you're saying that is equal. I think a few weeks ago, Facebook had something floating around about some guy standing, trying to watch a baseball game. And this short dude like myself, I'm not much taller either, but they all had the same box. But guess what? It wasn't fair. So it's an unfair way to look at it, saying that we're equal when we're not talking about fairness. I think that we have to look back at the disadvantages in terms of what we have inherited as a group, what we have inherited as a people, and provide us with a platform to move forward. Pastor make mention of it. After slavery was abolished, what happened to the Black folks? They were the end of the stick in terms of getting property. So they had to go back to the backroom masters to take jobs there. And that was also reflected in our church system. And because of that, we are still impoverished in some sense. So when we think about equity and capitalism and think about the church and organizations, it is still a ripe concept that serves to oppress and suppress certain groups. And it's incumbent on us to have these kind of conversations to trigger or stick changes within those entities so that people could be placed in a more advantageous position to make changes as they move towards maximizing their capacities.
Yeah, this is really heavy. I have so much that I want to contribute. I'm going to say a little thing shortly, but I want to hear Dr. Warner, if you want to begin, and then Cassandra, if you could just pick up after her in speaking to this. I'm hearing a common adhesive, and I really want to speak to it afterwards. But let me hear what you have to say or contribute to this.
Thank you. I want to think about it in a multi-layered way, and I want to think about it from different perspectives. So bear with me. So we already established that equity really is about how we distribute resources. So equality says we distribute resources equally. You get a quarter, we all get quarters. Equity says that the best way to allocate resources is based on need. What do I need? So going back to Jaymie's description of the picture, by the way, I saw it too, where you have everybody got the same size box. That was considered equality. Equity, however, recognized, wow, there is a shorter person. And if we're going to demonstrate equity, that person is probably going to need 2 boxes so that they can see the game properly. So when you think about that within the context of both capitalism as well as the gospel, I think about several things. When Jesus came, Jesus was very focused on what it is each of us uniquely needed. It wasn't a one size fit all, which is what equality says. Jesus says, hey, what comes to mind is the story when Jesus was going to heal Darius's daughter. Right, they came and he was on the way. And then here was this woman who needed something from Jesus. Jesus didn't say, oh, wait a minute, that's not the way to do it. That's not equality. Jesus says, you need something from me. So stop, touch the hem of his garment. That is a demonstration of meeting the needs of people instead of saying, okay, I need to make sure everybody is treated in the same way. People might have said that was unfair because had he not stopped, Jairus' daughter would not have died. But look at how beautiful it happened because Jesus met the need. In terms of capitalism, I think people think about capitalism as always something negative. And I'm going to be honest and says usually I think about it in the same way. But I want us to really reflect on the fact that capitalism really is a tool, a way
that can be used or
creating an economic system. So is it capitalism that's the problem? Or is it the way those that are in power is using capitalism?
That's good.
Here is what I'm thinking about. Capitalism subscribed to the whole idea of rational self-interest, competition, liberty, and freedom. Now, in the concept of Jesus talks about the fact that we need to be free. We need to have liberty. So in a sense, when we think about capitalism, we often think that capitalism and Jesus don't go hand in hand. But there are some tenets of capitalism that are so embedded in Jesus, liberty. You know, Paul talks about us being free. But then he cautioned us, how do we use our liberty? Not to use our liberty to tear each other down. And it's the same thing with capitalism. How are we using capitalism in terms of using it in a way that benefits those of us that need it versus using it in a way to suppress others? So those are just some of the thoughts that I have, and I can keep going, but I'm just going to be quiet so that Cassandra can have an opportunity to speak. But I just kind of want you to just kind of wrestle with the whole idea of what we have traditionally been taught about capitalism and really begin to consider whether or not it is the system or is it the people that is guiding the system that is the problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, Cassandra. You see why it's best for me to just, we have 5 more minutes to interact on this one.
Sure.
All right,
Laura,
go ahead.
I really appreciate what you just said about, you know, this concept or this idea that Jesus and capitalism don't mix. But you know, when I look through the Bible, it's obvious to me that it's very important to Christ and for us as Christians, if we're going to do the right thing, it means we're going to have to take care of the least of those, right? We're talking about the widows, we're talking about, you know, those without the fatherless, right? But then, you know, you have, you see the patriarchs and they're blessed with wealth, and then we see parables like, you know, the parable of the talents, right, where being industrious and being someone with an eye for investment is it's a praised thing, right? Yeah. But then we think back to you know, the year of Jubilee and you know, the every 7 years we let the earth rest and all of these policies that were put in place that helps to mitigate against this acquiring of wealth that has no bounds, that steps over people, that overlooks the fact that there are some of us who have more needs and thus need more resources, right? And I think that's where the problem is. When we have conversations about wealth distribution, about production, we tend to divorce it from the beauty of the gospel that invites us to mesh. Okay, you know, let's think about those who are in need, and that's the equity part, and then give them what is necessary, and also how do we equip people so that they can be a part of this, that we can make the pie larger. How do we make the pie larger to give people an opportunity to rise up the wealth ranks, right? To gain more, because I just can't vibe with this idea that wealth is not of God. I don't believe that. However, I think this, you know, that love of wealth that puts it that allows it to supersede everything else is very problematic. And, you know, in talks like this, I have to think about the fact that, you know, in America, we've done so poorly at putting policies in place that would mitigate and correct issues where equality is just not the outcome, where equity is just not there. I think that's all I have to say. I'm not an economist.
We have a lot more discussion, right? But as I pulled from the four of you, I believe it's just awesome. It's powerful. And coming from Dr. Walker and Cassandra, as you look at the whole idea of capitalism, it's really about the person in power. How are you using your power? Is it impacting the lives of others, or it is just building up yourself and, of course, the persons around you? And the challenge why whenever we think of capitalism, many of us, we think negatively, is because we do not value equity, right? We do not see equity in the church. We do not see it in our workplaces, and definitely when we start to look at taxations, etc., we do not see it in society. And as a result of that, it keeps people down, and that's what I'm getting from you. So we cannot say, well, we value everyone at this institution, and at the same time there is no diversity and inclusion in terms of how we place our policies, right? And of course, that also includes the church.
Yeah.
And not the society, because the church, I believe, should be the trendsetter. And if the church does not have policies that lift up the poor individuals in the congregation, lift up the women in the congregation, lift up the young people, focus on the silent generations in the congregation, say, how are we going to build everyone? We're not going to get anywhere. And that's what I'm getting from you. The question, though, as I'm out of time for this question, and I would like, Jaymie, if you could just touch on this. Can we speak of equity or diversity then, or vice versa, without having both of them in a conversation? Equity or diversity? Equity or not diversity, of mercy.
Inclusion.
Inclusion.
So I think when you think about equity and when you consider inclusion, if you have one group that considers itself to be above the next group, then they find it difficult to include another group, because by including that group means that you're including them in the means of securing the similar opportunities that you have. Now, if they have similar opportunities, it means that you're no longer at a better position than that group is. So now you have a dichotomy whereby this very thing that you don't want to happen, you're now creating by accepting them in that group. Now, when you think about that mindset where equity, equality, inclusion, and diversity is concerned, a number of us or many communities have accepted that position that we should not be included, and it's enough for us to just survive. Now, what we're having now in the country is that a number of groups are now disgusted with that position, because they're saying that we possess the skill set not only to be included, not only to be a part of the diversity conversation, but to perform at that very same level. But that can only happen if we include those persons, not only a part of the group, but a part of the structure, a part of the leadership, and a part of the decision-making process, because those three groups impact exactly what goes on paper that impacts how you move forward and how you operate within the given structures. So leadership have to take that move in terms of making that happen.
That's good.
That's what is on my mind, because I'm saying, right, if a couple of us who are I can't say us, who are well off, that might not be me, right? Right? And you're affluent, you have all the funds, you have your business out there, you're well established, you're making monies, and so forth and so on. If a few persons like myself, if I was that, go in a room and start to talk about equity, I will not be able to be impactful in the various areas. So it's good if I am going to talk about equity, if I am going to say, well, I'm going to lift up my church, I'm going to lift up my organization, I am going to lift up my community, or even in politics, I'm going to lift up my country. It means, therefore, that people who are categorized as nothing should be around the table. But what do we see when after election? Only those persons who are well affluent, well educated, they're the one that comes around the table. Of course, when they're going to do a photo op, they have the poor people in the background. But around the table, they are not there. And I'm saying that if we're going to have that, based upon what you're contributing, you have contributed. If we're going to have diversity and inclusion, and we're going to be serious about it, at every facet of society, someone must be represented from that table.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, there were so many things that you all said that I was like, oh, I want to jump in, but we wanted you all panelists to communicate all this in your mind to share. And so, but something that came to my mind, there was a discussion, what Jaymie had brought up, and the rest of you say that you've seen it as well, the image that's going around that's talking about equity. There's an article that was done that someone shared with me that is against kind of the image, because there's this ideal that the shorter person is innately less than, right? That's the critique to the image of equity in comparison to equality. And then there's this critique by Christians that say, you know, the term equality is what's used in scripture, not the word equity, right? And so my response to these things is that, one, in my mind, my understanding is that the need of equity is due to a limited and distorted view of equality, right? That biblically speaking, really, the term equality includes the definition of equity. But as humans, we have distorted this word of equality, and so that we can still walk away superior to another person, to another group, to another mindset. And so this term equity is now floating around to kind of supplement, right, the deficiencies that have taken place around the word equality. And then the other comment that I have towards this image of the shorter person being innately less than, I reject the idea that they're innately less than, but instead say that those that have more systematically, like Larry was just saying, they come into a room and they give jobs and they give opportunities to other people that think and look like them and don't consider those that are just as qualified, just as capable, but just think and behave or look different. And so the shorter person is not innately less than, as much as the shorter person is a representation of an oppressed system that lessens their opportunity, right? And so that's my response to that critique of this particular image. That I respect the critique in what you're seeing, but still let's understand the point that's trying to be made. And so if we can go into our third question, which is,
well, just real quick, Pastor Anderson, can I just jump in just real quick there? And I want to add to what you said, because I think this is a really important, I think, thing to tease out a bit around this conversation around equity and equality. You know, I also push back on the notion that the person who's short in the image is less than, because, you know, I think the reason that equity is, I think, necessary, not just because of distortions around the concept of equality, but equity is necessary because, and I'll talk about America again, the foundations of America were inequitable, you know, so equality was not the hallmark that was at the foundation or origins of American society. And really across, you see this across the globe. I mean, there's global examples of this as well. And so to, let's say for 400 plus years to be, you know, implementing systems and structures of inequity, and then to now say, oh, well, we're all equal. Like, you know, that person who's shorter, you know, I don't have an issue with you, but let's say in that instance, you know, taller persons, of which I happen to be one, create these walls that shorter persons can't see above. It doesn't mean that the shorter person is less than. It means that persons that were in power created walls that are too big for them to see over, and so
that only work for you, and
that only work for you and not work for them. And so you know, you need to, you know, Black persons are you know, we're of no less value or capability than persons who are white. But that does not mean that the system has not been set up to advantage them in a number of different areas. And so we can't just sit here and talk about how, oh, well, we're all equal, even though that's, you know, at a basic level, yeah, that's true, but and then negate the realities of what's happening around us. And so I just think it's dishonest for us to go about it in that way.
Yes. I agree. I appreciate that commentary. And so for the third question is, how have your efforts impacted real change, right? If you can share a story around how these efforts of diversity and inclusion and equity, us trying to implement these things in real time, how have you seen real change? And the reason why I asked this question is because we have a lot of conversations, right? Many of us have seen the image on social media. We've had these discussions, but there are a lot of people that are worn out, right? Are worn out with the talk and want to see if the implementation of these things can see the light, are productive, or can lead to success stories. So for anyone here, if you can just go ahead and jump in, because I don't want to put anybody on the spot. If you have a success story and how these implementing these things, please share at this time. Don't be too quick to jump in.
Well, yeah, well, perhaps I'll start.
All right.
And I'll start by saying this, you know, I'm somewhat uncomfortable in sort of, you know, so it's at the conference. So I'll say, I don't want to be like an anti-panelist kind of a thing. I sometimes tend to push back on questions around, you know, is it important? Should we do it? Because, you know, I can't, for me, it's kind of like the answer is an obvious yes. And, and that's not to negate the importance of the conversation. And also even questions around impact and things like that. I feel sometimes uncomfortable in saying, well, here are the things that I've done, and this is why it's, you know, good to do. Yeah, that, and so I think that, you know, I'm comfortable with folks talking to our students, and they can say whether or not it's been, maybe for them, it's been impactful, for others, that's a waste of time. But so the one thing so with that being said, you know, I'll share on a personal level how I've seen, you know, progress happen at the institution. That's been particularly meaningful for me. So I started here in the summer before the fall of 2017. And shortly after I came here, I made the decision, you know, I'm sitting here, I'm actually getting ready to move offices. So my office is kind of empty right now. Some of y'all probably noticed there's no books on that bookshelf. Does that dude read books? It's because they're all packed up. But so as I was getting kind of settled in here, you know, I decided to put some, you know, signs on my door and some messages and some things that can make it feel a little bit more like a diversity and inclusion office. And so one of the things I put on my door, along with some other things, was a Black Lives Matter sign. And you know, I didn't personally think much of it. I just thought, you know, hey, this is something that means something to me. It means something to a lot of our students. I'm going to place this here. And then as I was doing it, you know, something kind of said to me, you know, you're going to get some backlash for this. And I was like, I don't know. I don't see that as that big a deal. I guess I was being a bit naive. And so within a week, I got a message from a coworker. I won't go into it fully, but essentially accusing me of being racist and don't you believe that all lives matter and blah, 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 blah. And why are you doing this and this and that? And so it was a very discouraging moment for sure. And it was one of those moments where, you know, not that I expected folks to all be excited that I was here and like the work that I'm doing, like I expected there to be pushback, and I'd gotten a lot of it up until that point and even since then. But that was probably one of the few moments where I really kind of considered, you know, is this really worth it? Like, you know, if something this basic, you know, to have, you know, people react in this way, because I knew that that person was representative of more than that one person. That's just the one person that spoke to me. And so to kind of now be in a space where in your workspace, you're kind of feeling uncomfortable for sure. You don't know what the perceptions of people that you're around, that you're working with, are feeling about you. And, you know, I thought about it for a long time and obviously prayed about it. And, you know, God really sat with me with it. And one of the things that I discovered through that process is that, you know, there's certain things that you can't really fight against and advocate for until you've experienced them yourself. Now, that's not to say that we need to allow ourselves to be abused. And so I don't want to give that message at all. But I think that what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good, and that God didn't orchestrate that happening, but God had something good that he was going to work out as a result of that evil happening. And so, you know, of course, I didn't give up. And, you know, some days you have to remember that, hey, I need a job, and that keeps you going. Let's just be, I'm being real here, you know? And it's like, sometimes it's like, well, you know, I need to provide for my family, and and there was one of those days where it was like, I'm gonna continue because I need this. And of course the passion and stuff kicks back in maybe a month or so later. So long story short, and I alluded to it earlier, you know, coming into this summer, going into this school year, I've just seen so much progression and so much growth, particularly around that conversation around Black Lives Matter. We're getting ready to launch a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Campus Center on our campus, which is an initiative that was started by the Association of American Colleges and Universities. There are 25 of those campus centers now that have been established in the states. Some of the other campuses include Duke University, Brown University, University of Hawaii, and others. At this point right now, Andrews is the only Christian institution that's a part of this initiative. Their vision is to create 150 of those campus centers across the nation to operationalize anti-racism work on campus. And so in announcing that to our campus, an announcement that was done by our president, again, as I mentioned, on Juneteenth, where she's saying on behalf of the university that Black Lives Matter and we're committing to becoming an anti-racist institution. That, of course, is meaningful for so many different people on our campus. But for me personally, to have gone in, I guess, 2 years' time from being called racist for saying Black Lives Matter to having our president say that Black Lives Matter and committing to anti-racism and launching this center, I think for me, on a personal level, has felt like a huge success. And of course, the work is still ahead of us and we have a lot to do. But the real lesson there that I want to share with someone is, this work is really hard. It's difficult. It's challenging. It can be painful at times. And, you have to wrestle with, your limit. And sometimes people cross a line and you need to go. I say, go, don't stay there and accept abuse. But if there's something in it that God is wanting to work out on the other side of that situation, I just want to share that as a testimony to let you know that, the fruits of your work will bear, or the seeds that you're planting in your work will bear good fruit, and that the Spirit of God will bring to fruition that He's placed on your heart. And so you just have to keep pushing at times, keep believing, and you'll see the rest of the story be written on the other side of that pain.
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing. And I respect, what you were saying at the beginning. But I appreciate you going down that line. And I think that it sounds better when it's what has God done, right? If I could rephrase the question, what has God done in the area of diversity and inclusion that you've been able to observe, right? The impact and the work and the power of God within what we understand as diversity, inclusion, and equity. So if there's another individual that is willing to share what God has done in front of them in this area, please do that now.
Okay, I'll go ahead then. I think one of the things that we have found very useful, my associate and I, for Pottingers and Associates, is offering organization a predictive index tool that allows them to use data in terms of assessing behavioral patterns of those who they're hiring. So that helps in the overall hiring process, that gives them that immediate feedback about the strengths, weaknesses, gaps, and the behavioral tendencies according to who they're hiring in their organization, so they could have the right folks dealing with the right thing. Because many times organizations are fooled by the briefcase mentality, whereby the resume looks attractive, but the happenings or the behavioral tendencies from an analytical perspective is not the right fit to carry out the mandate or the structure that you need to help you in terms of having that inclusive, that diversified nature that you need for your organization. So we have found that to be quite meaningful, whereby it also shows your leadership teams exactly where their gaps are in terms of areas that they need to fill in and areas that they need to grow away from, and also allow them to see their team that they're working with. Because sometimes, you have tensions that are created in the different communities, because just like what pastors have, you have persons who may consider one thing to be a racist act when really and truly it has a lot to do with their misunderstanding or their lack of information in terms of what one group is going through. And based on that person's position, that person may not be the person that should be leading a group if they're in leadership position, based on their mindset and their behavioral tendencies. So I think it's very important in this technological era for us to have assessments for leadership, so that we could see their behavioral tendencies and their strengths and weaknesses, and see how that impact growth and impact where we place them. Because you may have a person who you consider to be the right person, but they're in the wrong relationship with your organization or with your given group. And they're not really about change. They're about cementing the archaic beliefs or practices that serves to go against the diversity and inclusive nature that we're trying to establish in the given organization. So I think that's pivotal. And I think that's one of the areas, as Pastor said, that I wouldn't say it's a success, but it's an area that I feel comfortable about and what we have been doing as a group in terms of giving people the tools and the skill set to effectively streamline those who they're having serving in certain capacities.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Cassandra, was there something you wanted to add to the conversation?
Yeah, you know, let me just say that I've been in my role now for maybe a year and a half, and you know, I've sat on many search committees and been part of investigations into things like this. And, you know, I think that I've experienced some level of success, and I am very hopeful. And probably the thing I'm most proud of right now is what I just finished this week with creating our equal opportunity harassment and non-discrimination policy, just spearheading that and collaborating with others on our campus to get that out. But you know, if I could be just really raw and honest in this moment, London, I think my biggest success story, which I think is God's own success story, and I think this community can share in it, is the very fact that my family is here. I think our very embodiment here means something, and it says something that's intangible and hard to articulate, not because lauding myself as anything or anybody, but I sense it, you know, when, you know, I'm connecting with other students who look like me, or, you know, when I engage with, you know, others who may not have opportunities in the past, you know, to have engaged with a person that looks like me. I think there's something just quite powerful in our embodiment, our Black bodies, ourselves, being in a community, in a position, and I'm particularly speaking about my husband's position here as the lead pastor at the university church, in that kind of position, so visible in a very, very white community, in a community that's not very diverse, in a community that's still grappling with these things, who makes mistakes all the time. Trust me, I'm on a mistake right now that I'm trying to fix. But to me, that is a huge success. And I'm confident that in the coming years, we're going to see, you know, God is going to find ways to materialize what it meant, what it means that we're walking and we're working in this work. And I'm hopeful. I can't say I have one thing. And my husband might be listening and be like, are you kidding me? You've done many things. But, you know, I feel like, no, you know, God's going to do, there's a big thing coming. And God is in the works. And I look forward to seeing how he makes that all happen using us, and us partnering with him on this good work. So.
Yes. So the labors are not in vain, right? The labors are not in vain, and I think that so often, I mean, I respect everyone's humility, right, that's being expressed around this question, and giving God all the glory for it. And I do believe that God will show those that need to see, right, the impact that such conversations have. It's just a thing of because what you all are doing, what it sounds like is behind the scenes, right? There will always be naysayers, right? But we don't want to give too much attention to naysayers, right? But there will always be naysayers that may not see the positive impact. And what I walk away, as you all have responded, and then I would like to hear Dr. Warner, it seems like she has something to contribute, is that God is working, right, is that God is working in this area, God is active in this area, and that God will manifest himself with all of those that are willing to be caring and loving and compassionate towards the people of God that think, look, and behave differently than ourselves. Dr. Warner?
I wanted to echo something similar to what Cassandra said about being used. I am in a primarily white space. I'm the only person of color on my faculty here in Missoula. And I found that, like Cassandra said, being the embodiment of Blackness has made a significant difference to my faculty and to my students. I often raise issues around diversity and racial justice. It's an ongoing conversation that I have.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, because it is something that I do and because it's something that I do well, I have been approached by leaders here in the city to lead a research, qualitative research project that's focusing on how do we decenter whiteness here and begin to leverage the voices of BIPOC people. So I think that for me is a major success story in addition to everything that I do on my campus. But the idea that here I am being asked to engage in this anti-racism work to bring about transformative structural changes in the city, I think indeed is a testament to God and to everything that he has been doing in me and through me. So kind of wanted to just share that as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now, we're gonna, Pastor Larry is gonna ask a question formally, but just wanting to give our last comments and giving messages of hope to our viewers. Pastor Larry?
I'm really taken into another level in this experience, and I know our viewers are as well. This is Zoom Hope Live. So we always do this as we come to the end of the discussion, just to ask you to share a message of hope to that person who has been excluded all the time. They have been intentionally just been left out. So what message of hope can you speak to those persons who have been excluded more than they have been intentionally included? Speak to that person who has often been the token. And as I was going over social media, someone had make a mention of that, that sometimes persons with power, persons with the authority, persons with the affluence and the influence believes that whenever they do something to someone who is different from them, whether financially or from a different social background or race, they believe that it's a token. So see, a black man was the president the other day. What more do you all want, right? So speak to that as it relates to someone who has always been left out.
Yeah. Jaymie, if you can go ahead and get us started.
What I'll say, Henderson, is that I'll say that you have to be authentic to your purpose, your passion, and your vision. And and the reason why I left the word plan out, I did that deliberately, because plans will change, but your purpose is something that God has given to you. And your purpose can be realized even if you feel imprisoned in the outside group, the us versus them mindset, the art of winning while losing. So while you may feel as if you're losing out on the inclusive side of things, just understand that you're winning because you have identified yourself with your truest purpose, and just allow your purpose to be your compass. And if you allow your purpose to be a compass, then you'll never ever lose sight or lose hope of what you were created to do. And for those who are on the outside, I'm going to be frank and honest with you. I think all of us at some point in our lives have felt that pain, what it feels like. It's cold because you're outside of the huddle, and the huddle provides a greater sense of warmth and opportunity. we got to understand that while you're outside, you have to use your outside mindset to create that inside nature, to push yourself on others who are watching. Because every time you choose to allow your to be excluded to prevent you from moving forward, you're cementing that ideologies in those who are watching you from pushing forward. And it's now time that we have to be true to a purpose or passion and to the God who created us with the capacity to dream beyond our impoverished inheritance.
Amen. That's a word.
That's deeply motivational and I love those words. I'm watching social media and I'm just seeing hearts going up. Thanks, Jaymie. Dr. Warner, if you could go next.
I think Cassandra was ready.
Cassandra, okay, Cassandra, sorry. Go ahead, Cassandra.
You know, I want to say to someone like that, I want to encourage them. I would encourage such an individual to find a reprieve and find time to remember their humanity and get in touch with that. Because what happens is when you sense, you know, you're in a perpetual fight to prove to people that you are human, that you're just as valuable, it for some reason has a way of being internalized within us, right? I encourage such an individual to make time to get away from that and engage with the acts and the things in their lives that remind them that they are good enough, that they are of value, that they are a human being with inestimable worth, right? And that might look different for everyone, but I know personally during this, you know, BLM time, I call it, right? I've been very intentional about connecting with my family, my friends, particularly ones who I don't have to explain anything to. You know what I mean? There's no explanation that needs to be had. When I connect and I sit down and say, today,
the internet is breaking up.
Oh no, I can hear her fine. Keep going. I think it might be Larry's internet. Go ahead, keep going.
When I, you know, there are times when I'll just say, okay, today I'm just going to take the time out to be a mama. And what's that gonna be? I'm gonna be hugging on Eden, and we're gonna go out for some gelato with our masks on. And, you know, taking that time to, you know, just remember, I'm not what I'm being painted as. God loves me. I have a beautiful family that cares for me. I have friends that care for me, and going in and setting myself apart for a moment. And then, you know, I get called back into the work. And, you know, when we're talking about someone who feels like they're excluded or token, they may not have the privilege like me to pull away and come back in that way. But I encourage that person to, you know, find ways, whether it is, you know, speak to a therapist. I totally, I'm all about therapy. I have a therapist to twice a month, and it's such a blessing, right? So those are the things I would say, that find ways to encourage yourself through reminding yourself of your own humanity. Is it that you spend time with good books? Then do that. Do you like to talk with a good friend? Then do that. Find those opportunities and take them.
Thank you so much. That's so moving, Cassandra. And with all the negatives sometimes that society, people, different circumstances throw our way, it's always good to find that reprieve. Look at the positive things in your life, or focus on building yourself even while you're down in the pit. I think that's really awesome. We appreciate that. Dr. Nixon, if you could just speak now, and then Dr. Warner will close.
Sure. I'll jump in. I'll share three things. And so the first thing, for someone who's feeling particularly that they're being tokenized within their their job situation in particular. That's something that came to my mind when I thought about this question. Become a master of your job description. I think that's really important. I think in the higher ed space in particular, you know, I think if institutions did somewhat of an audit around the responsibilities or things that fall in the laps of persons of color, you'd find that we're oftentimes doing the jobs of 2, 3, 4 people when we were hired to do the job of one person. And so being a person of color, particularly in a predominantly white space, don't feel that it is your obligation to solve the race issues of your organization or institution, particularly if that's not your job. And even in a role like my own, solving all those issues in and of myself is not in the job description. That's not in anyone's job description because it's impossible for any one person to do that. And so, you know, it's not your job to, you know, carry the guilt or fragility of the majority culture folks in your institution. You do get a chance, as others have said, to be yourself, to be human, to take time to do what it is you need to do to process the things that you need to process in those moments, and not just, you know, because of the fact that you're, you know, a person of color within the institution, that it becomes your obligation to carry that yourself. And so the other two things, they both come from one of my favorite authors, poets, personal inspiration of mine, Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman. The first thing is a quote that he would often share. He served in lots of different roles. He spent a pretty good amount of time at Boston University, and he was the first African-American pastor in North America to pastor a multicultural church. It was on the West Coast. And what he would share with particularly Black students at Boston University when they come to him and say, you know, what do I need to do? What's the world need? And back to Jaymie's point, trying to figure out their purpose and their calling. And what Thurman would often say, and what I say to myself, if not daily, at least on a weekly basis, he said to them, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and do that, because what the world needs is people who've come alive. And so that's really it. You know, you really need to understand what you've been created to do, who you've been created to be, and allow that to be sort of your guiding light and your true north as you move forward with whatever it is you're doing. And when you have clarity on what makes you come alive and you commit yourself to doing that, it can take you to lots of different, you know, vocations and things of that nature, but you will continue to be doing what brings you to life. And the last thing I want to do really quick is Thurman also, in his powerful book, Meditations of the Heart, writes a passage called An Island of Peace Within One's Soul, because I think this is really critical, particularly for persons who are passionate about this work. And I'll just read the last portion of that. And Thurman says this: the only hope for Circes, the only hope and possibility of stability for the person, is to establish an island of peace within one's soul. Here one brings for review the purposes and dreams to which one's life is tied. This is the place where there is no pretense, no dishonesty, no adulteration. What passes over the threshold is pure. What one really thinks and feels about one's own life stands revealed. What one really thinks and feels about other people far and near is seen with every nuance honestly labeled. Love is love, hate is hate, fear is fear. Well within the island is the temple where God dwells, not the God of the creed, the church, the family, but the God of one's heart. Into that God's presence, one comes with all of one's problems and faces God's scrutiny. What a person is, what their plans are, what their authentic point is, where their life goes, all is available to them in the presence of that God. How foolish it is, how terrible if you have not found your island of peace within your own soul. It means that you are living without the discovery of your true home. So it's my prayer that we would all find that island of peace where God himself dwells, and that helps us to come alive on a daily basis as we pursue this really important work.
Yes, Michael. That's deeply therapeutic and meditative. I find myself as you're reading, just going to that island myself. You know, the truth is sometimes we're on these program, and the panelists sometimes don't even know how much your words are impactful to us in our various contexts. You know, even as we speak about diversity and inclusion, this is something that it reaches home to me. I might not be in a context where you have a dominant white culture or so forth. And of course, white is not bad or anything, right? But I'm not in that context, but I can identify with the negative effects of you know, being put down, pushed out, beat up because of diversity, your background and so forth. So as you were saying that, I find myself just going to that island to meet Jesus. And I just want to appreciate you for that right on the spot. Dr. Warner.
When I think about offering a message of hope, I go to the findings from my study that focused on resilience in Black women. And as I reflect on a lot of the narratives that my participants shared with me, I want to just bring to the fore three messages that I want to offer. And the messages kind of encapsulate what was said before. Number one, my participant says that it is important to separate out your self-perception from the negative perception of others. And how you do that is become your own storyteller, become the narrator of your own life. That when you begin to say, this is who I am, this is what my purpose is, this is what my dreams, then you are leveraging your own internal voice and you're coming from a place of knowing. So that's number one. Number one is become your own storyteller about your place, about who you are, about what you hope to accomplish. A second aspect from my resilience study, Black women suggested that we need to be able to remember the fact that we are a part of a larger fabric of sisters. And that everything that we are experiencing now, invisibility of present, inequity of perception, being tokens, to hold on to the fact that you are never alone in that experience, that you share this legacy of sisters before you that have been through it. And that in the moment of your greatest sense of feeling weakened, think back historically about that legacy that you have. Think about it not only in terms of just in a conceptual way, but actually dive into profiles of people that can be an inspiration. And one of the things that I just did was I watched Hidden Figures. And that was a powerful story for me because looking at it, here is this woman straight in, only woman in this white group of men. And so it reminded me of the hope that, you know, my participants said, think about these profiles and think about what this person brought into that space and see whether or not you can leverage that. And last but not least, my findings from my studies suggested that it's important to reshape, recycle, and reconceptualize your experiences. And you do that by tapping into what my participants call the Black God narrative. Dr. Nixon really encapsulated that when he talked about going into that space. But the Black God narrative gives us this powerful message that says, Black women, you are created in my image. You are created for beauty. You are created to do something amazing and something fantastic. And even when you have to travel alone, you are not alone, because Emmanuel, God with us, is always by your side. And so for the person who feels alone in this space, I just want you to just remember, A, you are never alone, because you have a shared history of women that have come before you, that have been trailblazers and pioneers. And when you get discouraged, connect to their story. Second, tap into that Black God narrative that says you are an awesome person because your creator is an awesome God. And last but not least, remember, in the moments of greatest angst, to know that you are part of this beautiful fabric of sisters everywhere, and somebody somewhere is experiencing exactly what you're experiencing. So know that God is going to be with you. He has been historically, he is with you now, and he will be with you in the future.
Amen. And Cassandra's little princess came in there to receive those words of hope and encouragement, specifically from your study of encouraging Black women. I mean, I think that that's just beautiful. And we welcome her pretty face, her and the gifts that the Lord has for her, to just explore in her life. So happy for that. Now is the end of Zoom Hope Live. And I am so grateful for all of our panelists that have been here thus far. We are over time, but everything that you all have said has been so nourishing, has been so impactful. It's been challenging, and I appreciate all of the wisdom that you've shared. For our viewers, once again, please share this message that our panelists prepared for you and delivered to you today, so that more people can be blessed and be filled with hope. Pastor Larry, I don't know if there's something else you wanted to add, but I wanted to ask Dr. Laurellé Warner actually to do our closing prayer, if you are so willing to do that. Normally, one of us do it, but I would ask for you to do our closing prayer if you're willing. Larry, is there anything you wanted to add before she prays? No, there's not.
Yeah,
There's not. Go ahead, Dr. Laurellé, if you can please do our closing prayer.
Absolutely. God, you are an amazing God. As a matter of fact, you originate diversity. When you created the world in 6 days, you started from emptiness, and every day you added something beautiful and different. And so when we step out into nature, we celebrate diversity because it begins and ends with you. And so, God, as we enter a new week, I ask that you will fill us with an acceptance of diversity. I ask that you will recommit within us the desire to include people in our own spaces. I ask that you will put within us a commitment to equity and equality. God, we love you so much, and we remember that Jesus came to this earth to challenge those who wanted to exclude others. And so, Father, we accept Jesus's example, and we make the commitment today to move forward in hope, move forward in living a life that embraces diversity in all its fullness, because we are following your example. In the name of Jesus, I do pray. Amen.
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 Thank you.
So powerful. This is so powerful today, so moving and so important, very pertinent. But you know, I believe diversity is God's design, and inclusion is God's way of seeing his design flourishing and prospering together. I believe that with all my heart, and we have been blessed in that way, London, and I know our panelists too, they also have been blessed. Thank you so much for joining us on Zoom Hope Live, and we know that today definitely again infuse hope within the context of diversity and inclusiveness. I am your host, Larry Green, and our co-host.
I'm your co-host, London Anderson.
So until next week, we will see you again for another exciting discussion on Zoom Hope Live. It's more like a crow. I've been